Welcome travelers, my name is Kapora, and today we are counting down my favorite temples from Ocarina of Time. This is purely based off of my enjoyment of them and is not a formal countdown and list ranking them worst to best, because if I'm being honest, they're all great. I just like some of them more than others. So, let's get to it. First off is the Fire Temple. The Fire Temple is a weird one because it being my least favorite of all the temples, it really isn't that bad. There are a few big reasons this one tends to be the one I look forward to the least. First off, finding the Gorons to obtain keys is a fun concept, but they are peppered throughout the temple in weird places, which leads to lots of backtracking or getting to areas unprepared. If we had map markers to keep track of the ones we've already found, that could help narrow down places to search or explore further. The Megaton Hammer is a cool item to get, but doesn't lead to very many interesting puzzles, just smacking blocks we couldn't hit previously. And finally, the Volvagia boss, besides having a name that sounds, interesting, is a fine boss that can be tricky to manage at times with the wavy hair and falling rocks. There's lots of tedious things like invisible firewall mazes, bats, and the puzzles that include hitting the crystal over ledges that can make maneuvering the temple tricky at times. Next up is Jabu Jabu's Belly. I'm only 2 in, and I feel like this is the most difficult decision I've ever made in my life. Jabu Jabu's Belly is once again not a bad temple, it just tends to be one I cruise through without thinking about too much. The environment is cool and gross with lots of obstacles that when you really think about it, it makes you question Jabu Jabu's internal structure and if it actually even makes sense for a fish. Like, what is this supposed to be? The boomerang makes for a fun item with lots of uses in the dungeon, mostly smacking dangling tentacles or flopping blocks of jello, and the Octorok mini-boss is super tedious and not fun to deal with at all. I've played this game countless times and I still don't have a solid strategy for taking this guy on. The final boss is interesting and keeps you on your toes, just don't think about that death animation too much. Coming in next, we have the Water Temple / Ice Cavern. I decided to bundle the Ice Cavern and Water Temple together because they feel like a meal. You have your appetizer, then the entree. Both of these follow the phrase, not difficult, just tedious. Not much in either of these areas is technically hard, except for the slippy slope at the end of the Water Temple, and the block puzzle with the ice bats, and Dark Link. Once you figure out where the water level markers are in the dungeon, it's a lot easier to maneuver this unconventional layout. If the map was a little bit more detailed, or you can use markers, it would make it easier to keep track of where you've been or where you need to go. The puzzles are fun, and obtaining the long shot doesn't change the game in any dramatic ways, but it just makes it easier to maneuver. The bosses in both areas aren't very memorable, with the Ice Wolfos just being a normal Wolfos with a white coat, and the bouncy Nucleus is so bouncy that it is annoying to pin him down long enough to whack him a few times. This temple gets a lot of slack, and I don't think that's totally fair. It's a temple that just requires patience and a solid use of the game's 3D space, and I appreciate that. Dodongo's Cavern. This temple is an explosive good time because all you do is chuck bombs around. Well over 3/4 of this temple's puzzles are timing or aiming bomb throws. That isn't a bad thing at all, as it's actually an idea that gets stretched to its limits, and it serves a purpose. The temple's boss is all about aiming and timing bomb throws. This is what we call game design. Are you taking notes? The layout is pretty simple and linear, which is cool since it's only the second temple in the game. There is lots of new enemies that are introduced here which have some fun mechanics. Hitting the smaller Dodongos in the tail, the small little salamanders that wiggle toward you then explode after being hit, and this temple's hit and wait enemy, the Lizalfos. They're all fun enemies to fight, and using the Hylian shield like a turtle shell is some stellar flavor to this game. The Spirit Temple is a highlight of the game because it's the last main temple. I love the idea of doing half of it as Kid Link, then going through and doing the rest as an adult. I love that you can go back and explore the same rooms as Adult Link, making it feel like you're actually picking up where you left off. The Iron Knuckle fights are some of the best and most tense in the game with his high damage output and the fact you have to fight 3 of them. Twin Rova is one of my favorite bosses in the game and one of the best uses of the item found in the temple. This one is on the lower end because for as cool it is, I tend to forget about it altogether more often than not. Next up is the Forest Temple. Out of all the temples, this one has the most memorable soundtrack. The sounds and songs you hear as you traverse this abandoned mansion are so unique to the whole game. The puzzles with the twisting rooms, tracking down the pose, and finding that one key you're missing, it's probably the one outside in the main entrance, are all enjoyable. Obtaining the bow and arrow is a prize since it's nice to give it to you so early in the Adult Link section of the game. With that being said, the Phantom Ganon fight is a great time to get some solid bow work in, having to try to keep an eye out on the paintings to track down which of the phantoms is the actual phantom and not a phantom of the phantoms. Playing Dead Man's Volley here is the first 3D use of the mechanic, and it's fine. The camera's not your friend here, and finding an angle that works best for you can be tricky while Ganon bobs around in the air. On to the final 3, Ganon's Tower. I appreciate Ganon's Tower as it's the best way to wrap up the whole experience. It revisits themes and concepts from the main temples in the game, but does cool new things with them and makes use of all of your equipment. It feels like the frosting on the cake, and it's so sweet. I feel like it was kind of rude how they hit a key item in the Shadow Room, and if you miss it, it can create some confusion on how to progress. The final fight with Ganon is epic, and it tests your Dead Man's Volley skills with no Z target. Not cool. The actual fight with Ganon in his pig form has some camera issues and isn't as practical in execution as it seems on paper, but was a stellar way to end the game. Next up is the Great Deku Tree. For the most simple of all the temples, this one gets a high spot because of environment. The tree interior concept is used excellently, with the spider's web showing the corruption of the tree, blocking off access to areas, and spiders being your main enemy. The puzzles are simple but smart, with having to roll to burn the webs on the ground while holding a burning stick, and bouncing back Deku Scrub attacks in certain orders are straightforward but very fun. The boss Goma is the traditional hit the big eye, but the Spider Den is creepy and a great boss location and a stellar way to wrap up the game's introduction temple. I did always find it was a bummer that even though you cleared the corruption, the Deku Tree still perishes and everyone in town thinks it's your fault. What a bunch of assholes! My favorite temple in the game by far is the Shadow Temple, with the bottom of the well being bundled together here as well. Its mood, environment, and enemies are gross, disturbing, and very horror-based. It's an odd turn for the game, but when you really think about it, there has been tons of disturbing stuff already. This is just cranking it up to 11. The Lens of Truth leads to lots of cool environmental puzzles, spooky enemy encounters, and even just trying to get this thing pits you against one of the most horrific enemies in Zelda history. The floaty boots can be tricky to get a handle on, but test your bravery to run over the endless pits. Bongo Bongo is gross, and the concept is just cool, having to hit him while he's hitting the floor out from under you. Z-targeting him can sometimes be tricky, but it's still a fun boss that's extremely memorable, just like this temple. So that's my order for my favorite Ocarina temples. They're all unique, which makes this a solid set of temples to conquer on your quest to defeat Ganondorf. So let me know down in the comments what is your favorite temples in Ocarina of Time, and always remember, it's dangerous to go alone. Don't forget to bring a friend, and that friend is me. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you wanted to, go check out my full series of Ocarina of Time. I have the playlist here on the end screen, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye!